Okay, we'll start with the Mangalacharan. Om Majnana Timrantasya, Jnananjana Shalakaya, Chakshuruniltamena Tasmai Sri Guru Nama, Sri Chaitanya Monobhistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale, Swayam Rupa Gadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam, Vandeyam Sri Guru Sri Udavadakamalam, Sri Guru Vaishnavamsha, Sri Rupam Sagrajatam Sagana Ragnatan Vitam Tamsa Jivam, Satvitam Saudutam Paljana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam, Sri Radha Krishna Patan Sagana Lalita Sri Vishakanitamscha, He Krishna Karna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpati, Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namaste, Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radha Vaneshwari, Rishabhanuste Devi Pranamami Haripriye, Pancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah, Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda, Sri Advaita Gadadhara, Sri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Okay, today we'll be looking at text 38, the second last verse of this chapter, chapter 11 of Canto 1. In the previous two verses, we saw regarding how the Supreme Lord is like untainted by any of the material contamination. So this verse is also like a continuation of those verses. Etadi shanam ishasya prakritistopi tad gunahi na yujyate sadatmasteir yata buddhistata shraya. Etadi shanam ishasya prakritistopi tad gunahi na yujyate sadatmasteir yata buddhistata shraya. Etadi shanam ishasya prakritistopi tad gunahi na yujyate sadatmastir yata buddhistadashraya. Etadi shanamishasya prakritistopi tadgune na yujyate sadatmastir yata buddhistadashraya. Okay, anyone want to recite? Hare Krishna. Okay.
Etal isanam isaya praktistopi tat punai nayuj utes tat maistaya yata buddhis tat asraya.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Okay, we will proceed.
So I'll try.
Okay, Mataji. Right.
That Ishnam Ishaya Prakti Siddhopi Tat Gunaya Na Yate Sadam Siddhaye Yat Yadda Buddhis Tat Asraya.
Okay.
Is it correct?
The last one, it's Tat Ashraya.
Oh, Tat Ashraya.
Yeah.
Hare Krishna.
Okay. Thank you, Mataji. Okay, anyone else?
Hare Krishna Prabhu, let me try.
Okay.
Yeda Ishanam Ishasha Prakti Sto Pita Gunaya Na Yudyate Sadama Shadir Yata Buddhis Tat Ashraya. Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Thank you, Mataji. Anyone else? Okay, so we'll proceed with the synonyms. Etat, this, Ishanam, divinity, Ishasya, of the personality of Godhead. Prakriti-stha, being in contact with material nature. Api, in spite of. Tad gune, by the qualities. Na, never. Yujyate, is affected. Sadatmaste, by those who are situated in eternity. Yata, as is. Buddhi, intelligence. Tad, the Lord. Ashraya, those who are under the feet, under the shelter of. Translation, this is the divinity of the personality of Godhead. He is not affected by the qualities of material nature, even though he is in contact with them. Similarly, the devotees who have taken shelter of the Lord do not become influenced by the material qualities. So the translation of the verse starts with this, referring to like it implies that this verse is actually a continuation of the previous two verses, because in verse 36 we saw regarding how although when the queens of Dwaraka were all glancing at Krishna after seeing him return to Dwaraka, so even at that time the even Kamadev, he wanted to like invoke passions, or he wanted to agitate the senses of the Supreme Lord without even understanding the transcendental position of the Supreme Lord and also the queens of Dwarka. In that verse, it was described that Cupid or Kamadev, he was ignorant of the fact that Krishna was Swayam Bhagavan himself, and he also did not understand the transcendental position of the queens of Dwarka. So the relationship between Krishna and the queens of Dwarka was not like the mundane relationship of this material world, and even Cupid was unable to understand that, because he himself, he is like restricted to the jurisdiction of this material world. His duty is to agitate the senses of all the conditioned souls, all the conditioned living entities in the material world, and therefore he understood that Krishna himself was also just like the other living beings, like the other mortal human beings. So he was unable to understand that the Supreme Lord's body and senses are all transcendental, and therefore he was not able to agitate the senses of the Supreme Lord, and he had to give up his bow in frustration. This we saw in verse 36, and in verse 37 it was stated regarding how the less intelligent people who are unable to understand the transcendental nature of the Supreme Lord also often misunderstand that when the Supreme Lord descends to this material world, they tend to think that even the Supreme Lord is just like other mortal human beings. So that was explained in the previous verse, in verse 37. So this verse is also a continuation about how the Supreme Lord is never tainted by the material contamination of this material world, because he is always covered by his internal potency or Yogamaya. So even when he descends to this material world, which is completely full of material contamination, none of these forces of material nature could contaminate the Supreme Lord, because he is always covered by his internal potency, which is always superior to the inferior material energy. Even the material world and whatever all the aspects which cause material contamination, which cause the material bondage, especially for us the conditioned souls, those forces do not act on the Supreme Lord, because even these forces of material nature are merely byproducts of the inferior material energy of the Supreme Lord. So the Supreme Lord himself is the source of the inferior material energy, and therefore these the material contamination will not taint the Supreme Lord, even when he descends to the material world. Purport: in the Vedas and Vedic literatures, Shruti and Smriti, it is affirmed that in the divinity there is nothing material. He is transcendental, nirguna, the supreme cognizant. So this we have already seen in the Bhagavad Gita in several chapters, like in chapter 13 of the Gita. There is a verse in which Krishna says, Sarvendriya Gunavasham, Sarvendriya Vivarjitam, Asaktam Sarvavricheva, Nirgunam Guna Bhoktircha. So in chapter 13, it is about in the explanation regarding Kshetra, Kshetrajna. So as we know, Kshetra refers to the material body, or also known as the field. Kshetrajna refers to the knower of the field. But in that chapter 13 of the Gita, Krishna also explains regarding the knower in all fields. So the material body being the field, it acts as the temporary residence for the spirit soul, and the spirit soul is actually the knower of that field. So we are all spirit souls, and we are knowers of our own body. But even within our hearts, the Paramatma resides, and he, being the super soul, the Paramatma, he is the knower in all fields. So the Paramatma in each of our hearts, he also knows all the other fields, about all the other living entities. So in that chapter, when Krishna is explaining to Arjuna regarding Kshetra Kshetrajna, so in one of the verses, he talks about how the Paramatma is the source of all the senses and also the gunas. Sarvendriya Gunavasham, Sarvendriya Vivarjitam. So he is the source of all the senses. He is the source of all the gunas. However, he himself, meaning the Supreme Lord is the source of all the senses and also the source of all the gunas. So we know that this material universe is composed of the combination of the 24 elements, the Mahatattva elements. So in those 24 elements, even the senses are also part of that, like the 5 working senses, 5 knowledge gathering senses. So the senses come from, they are also part of the material energy of the Supreme Lord. And even the modes, the gunas, the 3 modes, namely goodness, passion, and ignorance, they are also part of the Supreme Lord's material energy. They are the byproducts of the material energy of the Supreme Lord. So even the senses and the gunas, they all originate from the Supreme Lord. But the Supreme Lord himself is without senses and without gunas, meaning that he is devoid of material senses and material gunas. So that's why the Supreme Lord is described as Nirguna. Now, Nirguna here means that he is devoid of material gunas. It doesn't mean that he has got no senses or he has got no gunas, but his gunas and senses are all transcendental. Unlike our senses, the material senses, we can only use each of our senses for a very specific purpose. But the Lord's transcendental senses, they can be used anyway as he wishes. Like the Lord can even accept offerings using his feet. So we cannot accept things using our feet. So such is the nature of the Supreme Lord's transcendental senses and gunas. So nirguna here means that the Supreme Lord has transcendental senses and gunas, unlike us, the conditioned souls who are encaged in this vulnerable material body. So all our capabilities are like limited due to our current position of being encaged in this material body. However, the Supreme Lord is transcendental nirguna and he is supremely cognizant. Hari, or the personality of Godhead, is the supreme transcendental person situated beyond the range of material affection. So regarding this, also there are descriptions from the Gita in chapter 15. There's one whole chapter titled Purushottama Yoga, describing that transcendental supreme person, Purushottama. So even towards the end of the chapter, there are descriptions regarding how the supreme person, Purushottama, is always distinct and he transcends everything else. So towards the end of chapter 15 of the Gita, there are descriptions like from verse 16 to 18. So in those verses, there are descriptions regarding the fallible and infallible living entities. So the fallible living entities are the living entities in this material world, like us, the conditioned souls, and the infallible living entities are those liberated souls who are the residents of Vaikuntha. But even after liberation, even those infallible living beings, they are also guided and led by the Supreme Lord, who is the transcendental supreme person, Purushottama. So he continues to lead even those liberated living beings. So this is actually the essence of Katha Upanishad. In Katha Upanishad, there's this conversation between Yamaraj and Nachiketa. So in that conversation, Yamaraj delivers the knowledge regarding how even after death, the liberated souls, they continue to be led by and guided by the Supreme Lord, being the transcendental supreme person. So such is the position of the Supreme Lord, who transcends everything else, and that's why nothing could contaminate him. The material contamination could not taint him, because even in the spiritual world itself, his position is above everything else. These statements are also confirmed even by Acharya Shankara. One may argue that his relation with the goddesses of fortune may be transcendental. Actually, it's not that it may be transcendental, it is transcendental. So that's why, as we saw in the previous verses, Cupid was frustrated because he could neither agitate the senses of the Supreme Lord nor the Queens of Dwarka, because their relationship is transcendental. The relationship between the Queens of Dwarka and also the Supreme Lord Krishna, their relationship is completely transcendental, unlike the mundane relationships of this material world. So being unable to understand that transcendental nature of the relationship between Krishna and his Queens of Dwarka, so Cupid was acting like he could he thought that he could simply agitate the senses of Krishna, just like how he would do for the other living beings. But he had to give up his bow in frustration after knowing that he could not agitate the senses of the Supreme Lord. So it is not that the relationship between Krishna and the goddesses of fortune may be transcendental. They are transcendental. But what about his relation with the Yadu dynasty, being born in that family, or his killing the non-believers like Jarasandha and other asuras directly in contact with the modes of material nature? The answer is that the divinity of the personality of Godhead is never in contact with the qualities of material nature in any circumstances. So here the explanation is regarding how the Supreme Lord, even when he descended to this material world, he always remained uncontaminated, despite the fact that he was still born in the Yadu dynasty like other normal people, and he was also engaged in the various battles with the demons. So how is it that none of these interactions never contaminated him? It is simply because that is the transcendental position of the Supreme Lord. So it is also stated here that actually he is in contact with such qualities because he is the ultimate source of everything, yet he is above the actions of such qualities. This is what transcendence really means. We know from Brahma Samhita 5.1, Ishvara Parama Krishna Sachidananda Vigraha Anadi Radhi Govinda Sarva Karana Karanam. Krishna is described as the supreme cause of all causes. So in that sense, even the material energy also originates from Krishna, and that is how he is related to the material energy, him being the source of the material energy, but it is still subservient to him. The material energy is still subservient to him, and therefore it could never contaminate the Supreme Lord. Apart from that, even when the Supreme Lord descended to the material world, he was always covered by his internal potency or Yogamaya. So Yogamaya is always superior to Mahamaya, which is the force of Maya which controls this material world. So Mahamaya is always subservient to Yogamaya, and therefore the Supreme Lord was never affected by the material contamination. He is known, therefore, as Yogeshwara, or the master of mystic power, or in other words, the all-powerful. So in our condition, like we being the conditioned souls, we are now subservient to the material energy. We are all puppets at the hands of the three modes of material nature. This is clearly stated in the Gita, in Gita 3.27. Prakriti kriyamanani gunai karmani sarvasha ahankara vimutatma kartayamiti manyate. We came to this material world due to our material desires, thinking that we could become enjoyers and controllers. But our current position is that we are deluded into thinking that we are enjoying and controlling this material nature, but the truth is that it is the material nature which is controlling us. Through the three modes of material nature, we are being puppeted by the three modes. And this is a very degraded condition compared to our original identity. We being the eternal fragmental parts of Krishna, as Krishna himself says in Gita 15.7, originally we are all part and parcel of Krishna as spirit souls, and therefore our original identity is that we are all part of the superior spiritual energy of Krishna. So the superior energy is always superior to the inferior material energy. The inferior material energy is always subservient to the superior spiritual energy. And that's why even when the Supreme Lord descends to the material world, he is always covered by the superior spiritual potency, Yogamaya. And since the spiritual potency is always superior to the inferior material energy, therefore the Supreme Lord is was never affected by the material contamination. Even his learned devotees are not affected by the influence of the material modes. So now this is the second part of the explanation regarding this verse. We saw that in the first part of the verse, it has been described that the Supreme Lord is not affected by the qualities of material nature, even though he is in contact with them. Since the Supreme Lord himself is the source of everything, so that material nature, the material energy which is subservient to him, could never contaminate him. So that is the first part. The second part of the verse states that similarly, the devotees who have taken shelter of the Lord do not become influenced by the material qualities. So this is the superior position of devotees who can also become similar to the Supreme Lord, in the sense that the devotees have actually regained their position through self-realization. Even in the intro part to the Gita, there is explanation regarding self-realization. So when we talk about self-realization, first of all, we must know which self are we talking about. The self refers to the spirit soul. So the first step in self-realization is to understand that we are not this material body, but we are spirit souls. So beginning from that stage, we continue to, as we progress further, then we will also understand that we as spirit souls, our original identity is that we are part and parcel of Krishna, and therefore we are meant to be eternal servants of Krishna and not the enjoyers and controllers that we actually desire to be. So our current miserable position is mainly because of our own desires to enjoy in this material world, but it is just not possible. Even in one of Prabhupada's quote, Prabhupada gives this analogy like the conditioned souls are just like fish taken out from the water. So as soon as the fish is taken out from the water, it can never survive, because that is the real nature of the fish. So even in our previous Bhagavatam sessions, especially the session we had for verse 36, we had that session for about 3 weeks, for 3 sessions. So we also saw a lot of explanation regarding Sanatana Dharma and Varnashrama Dharma. So even regarding Sanatana Dharma, Prabhupada has given detailed explanation about the definition of Sanatana Dharma in the introduction to Gita itself. So in that section, Prabhupada clearly explains the word Sanatana Dharma by first Prabhupada explains the meaning of Sanatana, and followed by the meaning of the word Dharma. So regarding Sanatana, Prabhupada provided the meaning based on the spiritual sky compared to the material world. So that explanation is available in the introduction section of the Gita, starting from page 15, if I'm not mistaken, in Bhagavad Gita as it is, the English version. So in that section, Prabhupada first explains regarding the meaning of Sanatana in the context of comparison between the material world and the spiritual sky. So the meaning of the word Sanatana is that it is eternal. When it's combined with Dharma, it refers to Dharma which is eternal. And Prabhupada also continues to explain that this Dharma is actually the eternal occupation of all living entities, not just for human beings. And therefore, Sanatana Dharma is not like other religions. So this was also explained by Srila Prabhupada, because the concept of religion is sectarian and it is often meant for human beings alone, but Sanatana Dharma is the eternal occupation of all living entities, not just for human beings. When we talk about living entities, we are actually referring to the spirit souls. So now, just because we have got this human body, so we are identified as human beings, but the spirit soul within us, that is our original identity. But in this material world, everything has become the perverted reflection. Instead of identifying the living entities as spirit souls, we are all being identified based on our material designations. So even among human beings, it is the material designation which always takes precedence. We even among human beings, we fail to recognize the other human being as a spirit soul. So this is all due to the bewilderment of Maya, and therefore we also tend to think that the animals and plants are also completely different from us. But in Gita 5.18, Krishna says, Vidya Vinaya Sampanne Brahmane Gaviyastini Shuni Chaiva Shvapakecha Pandita Samadarshana. The truly enlightened person, Pandita, is the one who is able to see everything as one, in the sense that all the living entities are one, because they are all spirit souls who are eternal fragmental parts of Krishna. That is how Krishna himself sees us. He sees all of us as his eternal fragmented parts and parcels. So he does not see the animals as inferior to human beings, because we are all spirit souls who are part and parcel of Krishna. It is just that we have all been given the different apartments. So as we have seen in many of our previous sessions, there are 84 lakh apartments. Actually, Srila Prabhupada uses the analogy of apartments when talking about the 84 lakh species of material bodies. So the 84 lakh species of material bodies are described in Vishnu Purana. Jalaja Navalakshani, Stavaram Lakshavimshati, Krimyo Rudra Sankhyaha, Pakshinam Dasalakshanam, Trimsha Lakshani Pasava, Chatur Lakshani Manushaha. Jalaja Navalakshani, 9 lakh aquatic species, Stavaram Lakshavimshati, 20 lakh plants and non-moving entities, Krimyo Rudra Sankhyaha, germs and insects, 11 lakh species, Pakshinam Dasalakshanam, 10 lakh species of birds, Trimsha Lakshani Pasava, 30 lakh quadrupeds or four-legged animals. Chatur Lakshani Manusha, 4 lakh human species. So this variety of 84 lakh material bodies have been described as apartments by Srila Prabhupada, because the spirit soul gets a particular apartment to reside in. For the conditioned souls, we all have been occupying the different apartments since time immemorial. Due to our material desires, Krishna created this material universe with this variety of apartments for us to reside in, and we were able to enjoy according to our material desires in all the different apartments. So as our consciousness evolved, we started to get qualified to occupy more prestigious apartments, and this human form of life, this human body, is actually the most prestigious apartment out of the 84 lakh apartments, simply because only in this human form of life we are able to engage in spiritual inquiry and also in devotional service. However, it is extremely unfortunate that not all of us are aware of the importance of this prestigious apartment. The time will come when we will have to leave this prestigious apartment, and if we don't fully utilize this precious opportunity given to us, then we may not be getting such prestigious apartments in our future lives. So that is how the material designations have actually degraded our position from the superior position of being spirit souls, as being part and parcel of Krishna's superior spiritual energy. We are now encased in these various material bodies, and our position is that it is the material designation which is always used to identify us. So even we ourselves, we have to first fight against this bewilderment of Maya, and that would be the first step towards self-realization. When we are able to realize the self, meaning when we are able to realize that we are spirit souls and not this material body, and from there we will further progress towards realizing our original identity as the eternal servants of Krishna, because that is our Sanatana Dharma, our eternal occupation. So our true nature is that we are meant to be eternal servants of Krishna, being his eternal part and parcels. So that's why Srila Prabhupada used the analogy of the fish taken out from the water. So we are meant to be servants of Krishna, but due to our material desires, we wanted to enjoy in this material world, and that's why we are now in this miserable condition, like the fish has been taken out from the water. So the only solution to end our sufferings is to regain our eternal association with Krishna in the spiritual world. And it is also to be noted that Krishna himself says in Gita 15.7, which is a very important verse. Krishna clearly says that we are all eternally fragmented part and parcels of Krishna. Therefore, we being the part and parcel of Krishna, we also have qualitative similarity. We are qualitatively similar to Krishna, and therefore that is what actually makes our position as actually superior to the material nature. Our original position is that we are superior to the material nature, because we being the spirit souls, we actually belong to Krishna's superior spiritual energy. But in our present condition, since we are conditioned souls encaged in this material body, now we are being puppeted by the three modes of material nature in this material world. So in our original position, we are meant to be superior to this material energy, but due to our material desires, we have actually been degraded to this position where we are actually being puppets at the hands of the material nature. So the only solution to overcome our current miserable position is to regain our original identity. And it has been described here that the devotees of the Supreme Lord can also be free from material contamination, just like the Supreme Lord, because that is how we can actually regain that qualitative similarity with the Supreme Lord. The Supreme Lord being the transcendental Supreme Person, he is never contaminated by the material contamination, and we can also regain our original position, which is qualitatively similar to Supreme Lord, by being engaged in his devotional service, because that is the only way we could regain our original identity. The great six Goswamis of Vrindavana all came from greatly rich and aristocratic families, but when they adopted the life of mendicants at Vrindavana, superficially they appeared to be in wretched conditions of life, but factually they were the richest of all in spiritual values. Such Mahabhagavatas, or first grade devotees, although moving amongst men, are not contaminated by honor or insult, hunger or satisfaction, sleep or wakefulness, which are all resultant actions of the three modes of material nature. So this is another important aspect of how we continue to be exploited by material nature. Our material desire was that we wanted to enjoy in this material world, but the situation is such that we are the ones who are being exploited by material nature, because as long as we are trapped in this material world, we will always be subject to all these dualities like honor, insult, hunger, satisfaction, success, failure, profit, loss. So that is the miserable position of all the conditioned souls. It has also been described in Gita 15.5, the 5th verse of chapter 15. Nirmana moha jidasanga dosha adhyatma nitya vinivritta kama dvandvair vimukta. Dvandvair vimukta means that being liberated from dualities. So in that verse, it talks about the qualifications to attain the spiritual sky, the spiritual world. So one of the important qualifications to be liberated to the spiritual world is to transcend the dualities of the material world. So as long as we are under the clutches of Maya, we will also be subject to all these dualities like profit, loss, success, failure. And we can clearly see that the main source of all our miseries is because of these dualities, which are also part of the material nature. So as long as we are being subject to all these dualities, we will always keep experiencing happiness and distress repeatedly. So the only solution is to transcend above these dualities. And once we become qualified to liberate ourselves and attain the spiritual world, we will be experiencing bliss, which is the transcendental happiness. Bliss, unlike happiness, is transcendental, because happiness in this material world is just one part of the duality. we may be happy for a while, but distress is sure to follow, followed by happiness for a while, followed by distress. So this is what actually makes our condition even more miserable, apart from the problems of Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadhi. Even while we are being in one particular material body, we continue to face a lot of distresses due to these all these dualities. But only the Mahabhagavatas or the devotees can always remain unaffected by these material contamination or these dualities, simply because they have completely dedicated themselves to devotional service towards the Supreme Lord. And how is this possible? It is simply because they have, even while being in this material world, like the 6 Goswamis, even while being in the material world, simply by performing devotional service, they have actually regained their original position. So when we talk about our original position as spirit souls, it can be described something like, we know that in chapter 7 of the Gita, there are several verses which talk about the inferior material energy of Krishna, and also the superior spiritual energy of Krishna, and the marginal energy, Tatastha Shakti. So our original position is that we are all spirit souls, and therefore we are also qualitatively similar to the Supreme Lord. Just as the Supreme Lord has his Sachidananda features, we also have that qualitative similarity, meaning that we are also originally meant to be in bliss, meaning the transcendental happiness. But it is only due to our material desires that we ourselves degraded from our original position. So we, as the spirit souls, we were part of Krishna's superior spiritual energy. Just like when Krishna descends to this material world, he is always covered by his Yogamaya potency, which is the superior spiritual energy. So the superior spiritual energy is always superior to the inferior material energy, since this inferior material energy is subservient to the superior spiritual energy, and therefore Krishna always remains untainted by the material contamination. So we ourselves, being part and parcel of Krishna, we also have that qualitative similarity. We can also be immune to the material contamination if we regain our original position, because we ourselves, when we are actually being part and parcel of Krishna's superior spiritual energy, so our original identity is like we are full of all the positive qualities, positive transcendental qualities. But our current position is that we are like stuck in between the superior spiritual energy and the inferior material energy. That's why in Gita 7.5, the conditioned souls in this material world, we are all being described as Tatastha Shakti. So the superior spiritual energy is like completely positive, and all the negative aspects come from the inferior material energy. And we are like caught in between, because though our original identity is that we have all the positive energy from the superior spiritual energy, all that positive aspects, they got nullified due to the material contamination, because we as conditioned souls, though our original identity being the spirit souls, we have that positive energy as part and parcel of Krishna's superior spiritual energy. That positive energy has actually been nullified by this negative energy or the inferior material energy. So as a result, we are like stuck in between, just like the number 0. So another analogy is like when we look at the number line, in the number line, maybe with the number line of integers, we normally have 0 in the middle. Towards the right, we have all the positive integers. Towards the left, we have all the negative integers. Or even in the y-axis, which is normally vertical, the positive ones are always on top, the negative ones are at the bottom, and 0 is in the middle. So our current position is like, though we originally belong to the positive side, our positive aspects have all been nullified by the material contamination. That's why we are just like that 0 stuck in between. And that is what Tatastha Shakti really means. Though we are originally part and parcel of Krishna's superior spiritual energy, our current position of being conditioned souls in this material world is like being caught in between the superior spiritual energy and the inferior material energy. So the only way to get rid of, to actually transcend further upwards, to regain our position as part and parcel of Krishna's superior spiritual energy, we really have to get rid of all the material contamination. Only then we can regain our original position. And once we are situated in that transcendental position, the material nature itself would be subservient to us, unlike the present condition where we are being exploited by the material nature. And how can this be done? How can we get rid of the material contamination? As Krishna himself says in Gita 7.14, Daivi Hesha Gunamayi Mamaya Duratya Mameve Prapatyanti Mayamitam Tarantite. So if we want to get rid of the material contamination, the only way is to surrender to Krishna. This is what Krishna says in 7.14, Gita 7.14. And even in Gita 9.32, Krishna says that regardless of our material designations, today, even among the community of human beings, there are so many different material designations. But regardless of all these designations, especially like gender, in 9.32, Krishna says, Mami Partha Vyapashritya, Yepisho Papayonaya, Striyo Vaistas Tata Sutras, Tepiyanti Paramgatim. So whether it is a Vaishya Sudra or even women, regardless of these material designations, anyone who surrenders to the lotus feet of Krishna, they are all qualified for liberation. So that is the only way to get rid of all our material contamination, and by doing that we can regain our original position, which is actually superior to this material nature. So our original position is that as spirit souls who are part and parcel of Krishna's superior energy, we are meant to be transcendental to this material nature. But due to this material contamination and our material desires, we are now in this type of position where we are being subservient to this material nature. So the only process to reverse this is through devotional service to the Supreme Lord, because that is what Krishna himself has clearly stated in the Gita, like in 7.14 and also in 9.32. So that is what the Mahabhagatas, like the Goswamis of Vrindavana, although they were even at the time when they were still in this material world, they were able to achieve that transcendental position, which is qualitatively similar to the Supreme Lord, meaning they were also immune to all that material contamination. So despite being in despite it seemed like they were living in poverty, but they were always spiritually wealthy. So that spiritual wealth is the only wealth that matters because it transcends everything else. Whatever material wealth which we accumulate in this life, everything becomes useless the moment we leave this body. So only the spiritual wealth could help us to overcome all our problems. First of all, it is important for us to really recognize what are the real problems of our life. Srila Prabhupada has clearly stated that nothing else matters as long as we are not, as long as we are able to think about how we can overcome these problems of Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadhi. So whatever material wealth which we accumulate, nothing is going to help us to overcome these problems. The moment we leave this body and take another body, again, we are going to be involved in the business of eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. And the most unfortunate thing with most Kali Jivas is that despite being blessed with the human form of life, we are unable to realize the importance of this life, which should be dedicated towards spiritual inquiry and devotional service. First of all, only spiritual inquiry could help us at least to initiate our journey towards devotional service. But the Kali Jivas are so bewildered under the clutches of Maya that we are unable to realize that we are actually suffering in this Dukkalayam. So without even knowing these problems, we continue to live like cats and dogs, being only engaged in the business of eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. And indirectly, we are disregarding the importance of this precious human form of life. So only in this human form of life, we have been blessed with this prestigious apartment, this consciousness of a human being to engage in spiritual inquiry and devotional service. So if we do not realize the importance of this human form of life, then we may not be getting this prestigious apartment again. So that would be extremely unfortunate, because even if we don't complete our practice of Krishna consciousness, still, as long as we endeavor, Krishna will also help us to continue our practice. When we get another human form of life to complete our practice. But for those who are completely under the clutches of Maya, so when they continue to even live, even while living in the body of a human being, if they only live like cats and dogs, then they'll only be getting those apartments. So the only way to regain our original superior position, meaning superior in the sense that it is superior to this material nature, as long as we are under the clutches of Maya, we will continue to be subservient to the material nature, despite the fact that our original position is that we are spirit souls who are part and parcel of Krishna's superior spiritual energy. So if we are able to realize that and we can actually rise to that transcendental position, so that we can also remain immune to all the material contamination. Unless these neutralities of life are there, one cannot be considered situated in transcendence. So once we attain the transcendental position, meaning if we sincerely endeavor in our devotional service, we can also attain that transcendental position where we become immune to this material contamination. So we won't be affected by these dualities of life. The divinity and his associates are on the same transcendental plane, and their glories are always sanctified by the action of Yogamaya or the internal potency of the Lord. So the Supreme Lord is always covered by his Yogamaya or internal potency whenever he descends to the material world, and that's how he is able to be immune to all the material contamination. Similarly, we are also part and parcel of the Supreme Lord's superior spiritual energy. So that is our original identity as spirit souls. So we can also reverse this current situation where we are being subservient to the material nature by rediscovering our original identity. So that is possible because we have that qualitative similarity with the Supreme Lord. Our original identity is that we are part and parcel of Krishna's superior spiritual energy, and therefore, just like the Supreme Lord himself, we can also attain that transcendental position where we can also become immune to all this material contamination. But that depends on how much we endeavor towards intensifying our devotional service. The devotees of the Lord are always transcendental, even if they are sometimes found to have fallen in their behavior. The Lord emphatically declares in the Bhagavad Gita 9.30 that even if an unalloyed devotee is found to be fallen due to a previous material contamination, he is nevertheless to be accepted as fully transcendental because of his being engaged 100% in the devotional service of the Lord. The Lord protects him always because of his rendering service unto him, and the fallen conditions are to be considered accidental and temporary. They will vanish in no time. So the devotees who continue to endeavor towards improving their devotional service, they will also be helped by the Supreme Lord. So the temporary fall downs or accidental fall downs will not affect them. So the fact that we have been blessed with this human form of life in this birth, it proves that our activities in our previous life, they were auspicious enough for us to be blessed with this wonderful opportunity. So we should continue to fully utilize this opportunity so that we can liberate ourselves from all these material bondages. And that's why it is extremely important to focus on self-realization by realizing that we being spirit souls, we are meant to be part of the spiritual world in our original position. So we made the mistake of wanting to be controllers and enjoyers in this material world, and the current situation is that we are being puppets at the hands of the material nature. So it is simply not possible to enjoy any form of happiness in this Dukkalayam, which is full of dualities. So the only happiness which we are meant to experience is that transcendental happiness or bliss in the supreme abode. That is only possible if we liberate ourselves from this material bondage through devotional service to the Supreme Lord Krishna. So we have completed the verse. So next week will be the final verse for this chapter. Thank you. Any questions or comments? Okay. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna.